By the time the Khepri emerged from translation, the survey crew had already lost the habit of surprise. This was not because the galaxy had become ordinary to them. Nothing so large could ever become ordinary. It was because deep space work, done properly, cultivated a discipline that was almost moral in its severity. Wonder was permitted. Wonder was inevitable. But first came the numbers, and then the models, and then the question of whether one's eyes, one's instruments, or one's assumptions had failed. So when the primary screens cleared, and the new system presented itself in layers of gold and fire, no one on the command deck spoke for several seconds. Captain Aurelion Voss sat motionless at the center station, fingers lightly resting on the armrests as if the slightest pressure might jolt the image away. Ahead of the Khepri, spread across the central display sphere, hung a planet that seemed less discovered than imagined. Vast, radiant, immense, beneath a starfield thick with distant suns. Its surface reflected light in long, molten swaths that coiled over continents like veins of metal still fresh from the furnace. Two large planets dominated the near sky from orbital perspective, their swollen disks drifting beyond the world like patient gods. One bore ochre storm bands beneath a gray haze, the other was darker, marbled with scarlet and pale mineral scars. Between them glimmered a smaller moon, bright and hard-edged, moving with the silent precision of celestial arithmetic. And below all that, below the orbital measurements, the spectrographic lines, the first cautious telemetry, lay the fact that the planet's surface was covered in lakes and inland seas whose chemistry made no immediate sense. Lieutenant Mara Chen, Chief Systems Analyst, was the first to break the silence. "Spectrometer confirms high reflectivity across the visible and infrared bands," she said. Her voice was steady, but Voss knew her well enough to hear the pressure beneath it. "Surface basins contain a metallic fluid. Preliminary composition suggests dissolved heavy elements in a superheated colloidal suspension." Dr. Ilyan Sarek, the expedition's physicist, gave a short laugh that contained no amusement. "Which is a more respectable way of saying that it looks like liquid gold because, in part, it may actually be liquid gold." "Not pure gold," Chen said quickly. "No," Sarek agreed. "That would at least be simple." The deck lighting remained low to preserve contrast against the main display. The officers' faces appeared in half-shadow, lit from below by instrument panels and drifting interface glyphs. The Khepri herself was silent, except for ventilation, circulation pumps, and the distant, almost subliminal thrum of the reactor assemblies. Voss leaned forward. "How stable?" Chen brought up 3 rotating models over the planet image. Surface temperature varies wildly by basin. Atmosphere is denser than predicted for this mass, mostly argon-nitrogen with metallic vapor traces and sulfur compounds in the lower strata. There are persistent electrochemical storms over the equatorial fracture zones. But the major sea regions are stable enough. "Stable enough for what?" asked Voss. Chen hesitated. Sarek answered for her. "Stable enough to exist, not yet stable enough for us to stand in." A few quiet breaths passed around the command deck. The planet had already been designated Provisional Catalog Number NGC4917B, but the human mind resisted numbers when a thing was so plainly singular. Someone in the cartography office, long before the ship had entered the system, had assigned it the shorthand Aurelion in the predictive files. The name had been intended as temporary. Like many temporary names, it had survived because no replacement could compete with what it had already suggested. Aurelion. It sounded ancient and imperial and dangerous. Voss keyed his chair display, and drew the historical overlay from Mission Archive. The survey of this region had begun not with certainty, but with absence. 3 automated probes sent over a span of 19 years had gone dark after entering the system. None had transmitted catastrophic failure logs. None had returned. Only the last had managed to send back a fragmentary packet, gravitational irregularities, anomalous mineral aerosols, and a single corrupted visual frame containing a horizon that gleamed like a polished mirror under a black sky full of stars. That corrupted frame had become famous before the mission was even funded. It had been analyzed in 100 universities, discussed in parliament chambers, sermonized over in frontier chapels, and turned into entertainment by people who had never endured vacuum or orbital burn or the long arithmetic of distance. A world with metallic seas promised wealth to the crude-minded, revelation to the mystical, and new chemistry to the serious. It had drawn investors, governments, and theorists into the same uneasy alignment, which was generally a sign that something much larger than science was already assembling itself around the unknown. Voss did not trust unknowns that accumulated admirers before they accumulated data. "Orbital hazards?" he asked. Navigator Seema Rowe answered from the aft console. "Gravitational field is uneven in a way I don't like. Local mass concentrations below the crust. Dense and patterned, not random distribution." Sarek turned slightly. "Patterned?" Rowe shrugged once, eyes fixed on her computations. "Too early to say, but the field harmonics repeat." Sarek stood very still. On another kind of ship, or with another kind of crew, that would have prompted immediate speculation. Here it produced something more useful: attention. Pattern was a word that meant everything in exploration and nothing in conversation unless supported. Humans saw pattern everywhere, in cloud shapes, in noise, in radiation drift, in the last words of machines that were only failing, not speaking. Civilization had crossed interstellar distances by learning how often the mind preferred significance to truth. Still, Voss noticed that every station on the deck had gone quieter. "Can you explain it?" he asked. "Not yet," Rose said, "but I can show it." She pushed the field map to the central sphere. The image of Aurelion dimmed as lines of gravitational contour wrapped over it. At first they seemed natural enough. Denser regions under mountain formations, thinner signatures beneath basin shelves, subtle tides caused by the neighboring giant worlds. Then the repetition emerged. Certain ridges and deep crustal structures were arranged in intervals too regular to be comfortable. Not symmetrical exactly. Something worse. Deliberate looking. Sarek took one step toward the display, then another. "That," he said quietly, "is either a natural process we do not yet understand, or," Voss said. Sarek did not answer immediately. He was an austere man, lean to the edge of frailty, with a scholar's caution and a fanatic's reserve. When he finally spoke, his words came with visible reluctance. "Or the crust is resting on an engineered substrate." No one laughed. Not because the suggestion was plausible in any ordinary sense. It was not. The scale alone was grotesque. To alter the mass architecture of a planetary crust required an energy expenditure beyond industrial absurdity. It belonged to that far borderland of thought, where astrophysics ceased to be a study of what was likely and became a census of what was permitted by the universe, if time, motive, and intelligence were not limiting factors. Arthur Venn, the mission geologist, rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Engineered by whom?" "That," said Sarek, "is always the least useful first question." Voss almost smiled. It was a typical Sarek answer. Technically correct, spiritually unhelpful. He brought the discussion back to immediate realities. We proceed in stages. High orbit survey first. No atmospheric insertion until we've mapped the electromagnetic behavior, storm cycles, thermal gradients, and those crustal densities. I want autonomous probes in the air before I want a single human body below magnetosphere. Yes, Captain, Chen said. Yes, Captain, Ro echoed. Voss looked once more at Aurelion. From orbit, the golden basins did not appear uniformly liquid. Some spread across flat plains like mirrors broken only by steaming channels and mineral islands. Others wound between black spires and mountain root formations that rose from the crust like the fused remains of towers. In the sunlight, they shone with impossible splendor. In shadow, they became darker than water, taking on the depthless quality of polished metal. It was beautiful in the way some truths were beautiful, enough to attract, enough to mislead. Bring us into high polar orbit, he said, slow and clean. The Khepri began its burn. From observation ring 2, Aurelion seemed close enough to touch and far too large to survive in the mind. Mara Chen floated near the curved glass, boots lightly hooked beneath a restraint bar, watching the limb of the planet rise. She had served on survey ships for 9 years and had seen frozen methane worlds, tidally ruined moons, and a gas giant whose storms produced kilometer-long crystalline filaments in the upper atmosphere. None of them had prepared her for the emotional absurdity of this place. It was not merely the color. Gold was a human category, an economic and cultural word too entangled with history to belong naturally to a world. Yet the seas below truly carried that impression. Not yellow, not amber, but metallic radiance, bright and heavy and unsettling. They did not look as if they had evolved. They looked as if they had been poured. She activated her wrist slate and reviewed the most recent atmospheric readings. Metallic aerosol density was still increasing over the terminator line. Thermal inversion layers moved like braided rivers. Charged particles spiraled along invisible lanes that refused to align with the planet's main magnetic field. Every fresh dataset produced, alongside its answers, a secondary crop of contradictions. Behind her the hatch opened. "You came here to think," said Dr. Sarek. "That obvious? You're looking at data and not seeing it." Chen let the slate dim. "I'm seeing too much of it." Sarek drifted beside her, steadied himself, and looked out through the glass. For a while they said nothing. The survey crews of the interstellar age had inherited many habits from sailors, one of the better ones being the knowledge that silence was not an emptiness needing repair. At last, Chen said, "Do you really think it's artificial?" Sarek folded his hands behind his back. "I think that phrase is less meaningful than people assume." She glanced toward him. "That sounds like the start of a lecture." "It is the avoidance of one." He kept his eyes on the planet. "We speak of nature and artifice as though the distinction were universal. It is only provincial. A beaver dam is artificial from the river's perspective. A city is natural if one defines nature as whatever intelligence produces. An engineered world is not a violation of the cosmos. It is only a statement that mind has entered geology." Chen considered that. "You think mind entered geology here?" "I think we are looking at a system whose equilibrium may have been guided by intelligence." "Perhaps." "Ancient intelligence." Sarek nodded once. "If it was done at all, then yes. Ancient beyond any scale that suits us." Chen returned her gaze to Aurelion's bright curve. Along the night side, faint electric storms winked in chains over the basin regions. They were too orderly to be weather, too shifting to be cities. They flickered and vanished before her brain could assign them a category. The silence stretched. Finally, Chen said, "The missing probes." "Yes." "You think they were destroyed?" "I think they encountered an environment that exceeded their design tolerances. Or they found something that interrupted transmission. Or the system itself is hostile to certain forms of instrumentation." Chen gave him a side glance. "That last part sounds almost mystical coming from you." "No," Sarek said. "Only physical. There are many ways to silence a machine." He lifted his slate and enlarged a section of the crustal density model. The repeating harmonics appeared again, embedded beneath a southern continent, where black ridges enclosed a basin almost the size of an inland sea back on Earth. "There," he said. Chen squinted. "A nodal region?" "Possibly. It corresponds to a major anomaly in local gravity and a persistent thermal bloom under the crust. If I were forced to gamble on where the system's secrets are concentrated, I would begin there." "Assuming it has secrets." Sarek turned to her then, and for the first time she saw something like unease in his expression. "All worlds have secrets, Lieutenant. Most of them are merely dull. This one," he said softly, "has the courtesy to be dramatic." The first probe descended 4 hours later. It was a standard atmospheric instrument package wrapped in a heat-tolerant shell, equipped with multispectrum imagers, gravimeters, chemical samplers, and 3 redundant communications arrays. The Khepri released it from low orbit above the western basin chain, where the meteorological conditions were, by Aurelion standards, almost calm. On the command deck, the crew watched the telemetry stream unfurl across the displays. Altitude fell. Atmospheric pressure rose. Surface temperatures stabilized within projected margins. The probe entered the upper cloud strata and began transmitting visual data. A collective murmur passed over the deck. The clouds were not clouds in any familiar terrestrial sense. They were suspended metallic particulates and vapor plumes, gleaming in bands and curtains, lit from below by the sea itself. Beneath them spread a landscape at once mineral and fluid. Black rock terraces, shining channels, steaming flats, and immense mirror-like expanses that reflected the sky so perfectly they created false abysses where stars seemed to burn beneath the surface. The probe dipped lower. Jagged formations rose along the shorelines, tall black spires and buttresses coated in reflective deposits, as if the planet had attempted architecture without first inventing life. Between them ran bright streams, branching and recombining with mathematical intricacy. They did not move like water. They moved more slowly, more heavily, with a viscosity that suggested molten metal and yet did not radiate enough heat to fit that explanation. "Sampling arm active," Chen reported. "Magnetometer spiking," Rowe said. "Communications holding," Voss said, mostly to himself. The probe crossed above one of the great lakes. The surface was glass smooth, except where slow, concentric disturbances spread from points no larger than raindrops. But there was no rain. The rings widened, intersected, and vanished. Then new rings appeared farther out, and farther still, until the whole sea seemed to be answering signals too subtle to see. Ven frowned at his console. "Impact events?" Chen shook her head. "Negative." Sarek's face had gone very still. "What is it?" Voss asked. Sarek enlarged the disturbance map and overlaid timing intervals. A sequence emerged, not perfect but undeniable enough to chill the room. "They're periodic," he said. "Periodic how?" asked Voss. Sarek looked at him. "Like response." For a moment no one moved. The probe descended to 200 meters above the surface, its imagers sharpened. The golden sea filled the main display. It was not uniformly metallic. Within the bright matrix drifted darker currents and suspended granular structures like dust or pollen trapped in amber. Sunlight struck the basin at a low angle and produced impossible reflections. The sky burned above. The lake burned below. The probe seemed to hang between two universes made of the same fire. Then something changed. Chen saw it first. "Captain!" A line appeared beneath the surface. Not a crack, not a ripple, a line, straight, dark, extending far beyond the frame. It moved with impossible steadiness, traveling under the metallic sea at a speed that made no sense for current or convection. As the probe banked to follow it, additional lines emerged in parallel, then intersecting diagonals, then great geometric shadows beneath the molten brightness. The deck fell silent again, but this silence was different from the first one. This was no longer wonder disciplined by caution. This was the older thing beneath both. Recognition without understanding, the instinctive awareness that the universe had just become larger in a direction one had not prepared for. "Enhance," Voss said, though Chen had already done it. The probe dropped another 50 meters. The geometry beneath the sea resolved by degrees, edges, planes. Angles too clean for geology. Something vast lay submerged beneath the auric basin. Not wreckage, not isolated formations, but structure. Kilometer upon kilometer of it, sunken beneath the metallic fluid, arranged in nested grids and radial corridors. Portions of it shone faintly from within, as though buried systems had noticed the passing of the probe, and, after an age beyond counting, had begun to wake. Sarek whispered a word so softly that only Chen, beside him, heard it. "Impossible." The probe's instruments surged into overload. One by one, feed channels flared white with noise. Gravimetric readings spiked. Magnetics rose beyond calibration. A deep harmonic entered the audio pickup. A vibration below hearing translated upward by machine filters into a slow, resonant tone that filled the deck like the first note of some planetary organ. Then the image stabilized for one last fraction of a second. At the center of the basin, far below the golden surface, a circular form opened. Not mechanically, not organically. Simply with the certainty of a system resuming function. Concentric rings turned inside darkness. A light came on in the deep, and the probe vanished from every screen aboard the Khepri. No explosion, no breakup, no distress burst, only absence. Captain Voss remained seated for 3 full seconds after the feed died, because training was sometimes nothing more than the ability to delay visible reaction until thought had a chance to overtake emotion. Then he rose. Seal all external telemetry channels except passive receive. Full diagnostic on orbital systems. No further probe launches until we understand what just happened. No one answered immediately. Then, all at once, the deck came alive. Chen's hands moved over her console, calling up the last buffered frames. Rowe recalculated orbital safety margins. Ven began cross-referencing the submerged geometry against natural crystal growth models with the resigned speed of a man already certain they would fail. Sarek stood staring at the dead screen, not like a scientist facing a puzzle, but like a historian hearing a door open in a tomb that had never before admitted light. Below them, Aurelion turned in majestic silence, its golden seas shining under the stars. The world did not look hostile. It looked patient. And for the first time since the Khepri entered the system, Elian Voss understood that discovery was no longer the correct word for what lay ahead. They had not found Aurelion. Aurelion had noticed them. For 14 hours after the loss of the first probe, no one on the Khepri used the word landing. They said surface operation, close contact survey, instrument emplacement, manned descent contingency. They built a wall of procedural language around the thing itself, because language was sometimes the first shield reason raised against awe. A planet that swallowed machines without violence and woke lights in buried structures did not invite explorers down to its skin. It issued a problem. Problems had methods. Methods preserved the distinction between courage and stupidity. Captain Elian Voss held 3 planning sessions in that time, each narrower and more severe than the last. The first reviewed the facts. The second discarded half of them as insufficiently verified. The third ended with an authorization no one had expected to be granted so soon. A limited ground mission. Not because the risk had become acceptable, but because delay was beginning to generate a different kind of risk. The buried structure beneath the Auric Basin had not gone dark again. Passive instruments, tuned to the frequencies recorded in the final seconds before the probe's disappearance, continued to detect low-level harmonic emissions from the same region. Not random bursts, not geological tremors. A patterned, repeating signal moving through the crust in intervals too regular to dismiss. The world had not merely reacted. It had remained active. And so the argument shifted. If the activation was transient, waiting might mean losing the one opportunity to study the phenomenon in its current state. If it was escalating, waiting might mean facing something far more dangerous later. Between those two uncertainties lay the ancient logic of all exploration. There are moments when ignorance is not safer than action, only quieter. The landing team assembled in Forward Briefing Module 3. A transparent wall gave onto space, where Aurelion turned below them in a slow blaze of gold and black. The basin chosen for descent lay near the edge of a broad metallic sea, on a rocky shelf that orbital scans suggested was chemically stable and topographically defensible. From there, a 6-kilometer traverse would lead toward the region where the submerged geometry had first appeared. Voss stood at the front, one hand braced against the table rail as gravitic compensation shifted with the ship's minor corrections. "You all know why you're here," he said. "You're here because the probe loss didn't fit any failure model we trust, because the structure under Basin 12 is active, and because no instrument package we drop from orbit will answer the questions that matter now." He looked at each of them in turn. Lieutenant Mara Chen, Systems Analyst and Mission Integration Lead. Dr. Ilyan Sarek, Physicist and Anomaly Specialist. Arthur Venn, Geologist. Talia Omondi, Exobiologist, included over her own objections that there was likely no biology worth studying in a metallic storm basin. And Jonas Hale, Marine and Surface Operations Chief, whose profession had survived into the interstellar age under many new names, but still amounted to the same old task: being the person who went outside when outside was trying to kill everyone. "Objectives are restricted," Voss continued. "Emplace sensor stakes, sample substrate, atmosphere, and fluid interfaces. Confirm whether the harmonic source is environmental, structural, or induced by our presence. No heroics, no improvisational archaeology, no contact with any exposed mechanism if mechanism is what it is." Venn raised a hand without waiting to be recognized. "What exactly counts as contact? Because if we step onto a buried panel the size of a continent—" "It counts as unavoidable," Voss said. "Use judgment." "That's always reassuring. Judgment is what separates us from probes. Hale gave a dry smile at that. Sarek did not. Chen sat with her slate open, cross-referencing suit telemetry thresholds with local field projections. Her thoughts moved in parallel channels, one attending to the briefing, one to the planetary models, and one to a private unease she had not yet translated into words. The image from the lost probe remained in her mind with unreasonable clarity. The circular aperture opening beneath the golden sea, the rings turning in darkness, the light coming on below kilometers of metallic fluid as calmly as a room being entered. Worlds were not supposed to behave like devices, and yet this one did. Communications protocol, Voss said. Tight beam laser to lander when possible, burst relay to orbit only when line of sight degrades. We assume local electromagnetic interference can spike without warning. If you lose contact with the ship, your first priority is re-establishing link with the lander. If you lose link with the lander, you return to it. If you lose the lander, then we've made a series of bad decisions, Hale said. A few restrained smiles passed around the table. Voss permitted them. Ritual humor had its place. It reminded people that fear could be acknowledged without being obeyed. Surface window is 4 hours, he said. At that point, the storm margin from the western fracture zone starts drifting over the basin shelf. We leave whether or not we have answers. Sarek finally spoke. And if the source activates again while we're there? Voss held his gaze. Then you observe, you do not engage. That left a silence in the room more eloquent than any agreement, because engage was not a scientific term. It belonged to military doctrine, security planning, and the private vocabulary of human caution when confronting something that might possess agency. No one commented on it. No one needed to. The meeting ended. The team dispersed to suit prep and instrument checks. Chen remained seated a moment longer, watching Aurelion revolve beyond the glass. Sunlight struck the auric basins and scattered into brilliant lines across the observation surface. From this height, the planet's impossible beauty remained almost abstract. No smell, no heat, no texture. Only the polished lie of distance, turning danger into spectacle. Sarek paused at the hatch behind her. "You think the captain is wrong," she said. "I think he is prudent in ways that do not scale to this problem." That sounds dangerously close to criticism. It is criticism. He stepped into the room and looked out toward the basin below. We are descending onto a world that may contain active megastructural systems older than human civilization by millions of years, and our official position is that we will not engage. But if the system engages us, that distinction will collapse. Chen shut her slate. Maybe he's trying to keep people from getting seduced by the mystery. That would also be prudent, Sarek said, and probably futile. He left before she could answer. The lander Peregrine detached at 0900 shipboard time. It dropped from the Khepri on a column of controlled thrust, its ablative shell shimmering as it entered the upper atmosphere. The descent cabin was cramped even by expedition standards. 5 suited bodies in acceleration couches, 1 central holo display, instrument racks along the aft bulkhead, and the soft mechanical breathing of life support systems, working harder than they were designed to admit. Hale sat nearest the hatch, helmet resting against the headpad, gloved hands loose over his restraints. "Still hate this part," he said to no one in particular. "Which part?" Omondi asked. "The fall or the destination?" "Yes." The cabin vibrated as the first cloud layers struck the hull. On the central display, external feeds cycled through thermal, optical, and LiDAR composites. Metallic vapor streamed around the lander in bright curtains. The sky outside, where visible through filtered cameras, glowed with impossible colors: copper, white gold, deep green shadow. Lightning moved horizontally through the cloud decks in branching sheets, tracing paths that seemed to curve around empty geometries in the air. Chen monitored systems drift. Minor compass anomalies, expected. Surface gravitic noise, higher than projected. Also expected, if the phrase could still mean anything on this planet. Electromagnetic environment rising, she said, still within shielding margins. Wind shear? Hale asked. The pilot, a compact woman named Ndeye Solano, who had no interest in unnecessary speech, answered without turning. Annoying. That from Solano meant severe but manageable. The peregrine punched through the lower haze, and the world opened beneath them. Even prepared by orbital imagery, no one in the cabin was truly prepared. The basin shelf spread out like the exposed edge of a dream made geological. Black mineral ground ribbed with reflective veins, islands of jagged crystalline growths, and beyond them the vast shining expanse of the Auric Sea. It lay under the sky like a sheet of liquid sunlight, disturbed only by slow currents and small vapor plumes where thermal fissures vented through the crust. Across the horizon rose towering spires, columnar formations encrusted with luminous deposits, blazing orange gold in the reflected light. Some were natural. Some looked natural from a respectful distance. A few, Chen thought, looked like erosion had merely revealed shapes that had once been built. Above all of it hung the cosmos with offensive magnificence. A band of bright star cloud cut across the heavens. Nearby worlds loomed enormous, one ringless and scarred, another pale and half in shadow. Far beyond them, through atmospheric distortion, a spiral galaxy burned like a wound in the dark. Omandi exhaled a single involuntary word. God. No, said Sarek, staring at the display. Something else. The landing struts took the ground with a controlled jolt. Dust, or what passed for dust here, rose around them in glittering sheets, slowly settling through air dense enough to hold its motion. The engines wound down. Silence arrived in layers, first the end of thrust, then the hiss of cooling exterior plates, then the ordinary enclosed hum of a machine that had safely become a shelter. Solano unstrapped. Surface stable, hull integrity nominal, external radiation spiky but acceptable. Congratulations, we're standing in the least sensible place anyone has chosen on purpose. Hale was already releasing the hatch seals. The first sensation outside was not sight, but resistance. The atmosphere pressed against the suit fabric with a subtle but undeniable density, as though the air possessed a memory of fluid. Chen stepped down the lander ramp and onto Aurelion's crust with the careful formality of someone not trusting gravity, ground, or history. Her boots touched black rock dusted with metallic deposits that flashed gold under the low sun. The surface was firm, faintly warm, and so smooth in places that it reflected her suit's legs back at her in warped lines. For a moment, she could do nothing but stand. Ahead, the basin stretched in every direction under a sky so full of structures, astronomical, meteorological, and geological, that the human eye struggled to assign importance. The Auric Sea lay only 300 meters away, bright as molten metal yet strangely tranquil. Beyond it, the black spires rose like organ pipes or ruined towers, some hundreds of meters high, their interiors glowing through cracks and apertures with ember-colored light. The ground team spread out in a disciplined fan around the lander. Hale planted the first beacon and checked perimeter telemetry, then crouched at once, taking substrate samples with the devotion of a man who believed rocks were more honest than people. Omandi aimed her suite of atmospheric analyzers toward a steaming fissure. Sarek simply turned in place, not collecting anything, as if trying to feel a pattern too large for the eyes alone. "Surface conductivity is extraordinary," Chen said over suit comms, more to keep everyone talking than from necessity. "Watch your tool grounding." Ven scraped a sample into a sealed cartridge. "Substrate is layered silicates, metallic inclusions, and something I can't identify without a lab, which, to be fair, is becoming the theme of the day." Omandi knelt beside a crusted outcrop, sensor wand extended. "Trace organics are effectively zero. If there's life here, it either hides very well or uses a chemistry no one briefed me on." "Everyone sees the spires?" Hale asked. "No," said Solano from inside the lander, monitoring exterior cams. "We imagined them for dramatic effect." "I mean those openings." Chen turned. She had noticed them already but had not yet wanted to say so. Several of the nearest towers bore vertical rents or window-like cavities running up their sides, exposing inner material that glowed a deep orange beneath layers of pale mineral crust. The light was steady. Not fire. Not reflection. "Thermal imaging?" she asked. Solano sent the overlay to their suit displays. The interiors were warm, but not molten. The heat signatures pulsed in slow intervals. Sarek stopped walking. "Do not approach the towers yet," he said. Hale's head turned toward him. "You saying that as advice or as prediction?" "Yes." No one moved toward them. The team began the traverse instead, keeping the sea to their left and the lander behind them. Each step sent tiny, bright fragments skittering over the dark ground. The surface undulated in shallow ridges, like frozen waves beneath a skin of metal dust. Occasionally, they crossed long, polished bands where the rock was so reflective that the horizon seemed doubled, the sky continuing under their feet in a dark gold mirror. Chen found herself watching not the grand features but the small motions, viscous droplets trembling on stone edges without falling, narrow runnels of metallic fluid moving uphill for a few centimeters before sinking into cracks, electrical discharges crawling over crystal faces in slow branching filaments. The entire environment had the unnerving quality of a machine still warm from use. At the second beacon drop, Hale paused. "You seeing that?" He pointed toward the shoreline. From the edge of the Oryx Sea, concentric ripples were spreading outward in perfect circles. One set, then another farther down, then another. No wind disturbed them. No visible object entered the fluid. The rings widened across the metallic surface, intersected, and vanished into the glare. Chen brought up magnification. Same phenomenon as the probe saw. Ven stood, sample cartridge forgotten in one hand. "Could be gas release." "Could," Sarek said, "if gas has learned rhythm." The ripples continued for another 10 seconds, then stopped all at once. Not faded. Stopped. A silence entered the comm channel that had nothing to do with transmission failure. "Mark the location," Voss said from orbit, his voice compressed but clear. "Continue mission plan. No shoreline contact." Chen was unexpectedly grateful to hear him. The captain's voice carried distance, and distance restored proportion. It reminded her that a ship still circled overhead, that command and procedure still existed, that they had not stepped wholly outside the map of ordinary causality. Then the ground moved under her boots. Not an earthquake, not a tremor. A vibration, low and smooth, rising through the crust with such regularity that at first her body mistook it for suit feedback. The others had felt it too. Hale had frozen mid-step. Omandi was looking down. Even Ven, who trusted geology more than his own nerves, had gone rigid. "Seismic event?" Chen asked. Ven checked his instruments. "No shear waves, no fracture release. It's harmonic." Sarek's voice came quietly over the comm. "Listen." They did. Suit contact mics translated substrate vibration into audible frequency. What emerged in their helmets was a tone so low and resonant it seemed less heard than inhabited. It rose by intervals, held, then descended again, repeating with mechanical patience. Not music, not language, but structured enough that no one mistook it for blind geology. Omandi whispered, "It knows we're here." "Careful," said Sarek. "That is interpretation." "Then interpret this," Hale said. Ahead of them, half buried in a rise of dark mineral crust, something was emerging. At first, Chen thought it was merely an outcrop uncovered by shifting dust. Then the surface split along a line too straight to be natural. Metallic fragments slid aside. Beneath them, a smooth black plane rose from the ground, without visible hinges or pistons, lifting silently through a haze of sparkling particles. It stood taller than a human, rectangular, featureless except for a circle at its center that glowed with the same deep ember light visible inside the distant towers. No one moved. The tone in their helmets deepened. Another plane rose 20 meters farther on. Then another. A corridor was forming in the basin shelf, opening one section at a time, leading away from the shore and inland toward the black spires. Voss's voice came sharp through comms. "Ground team, fall back to the lander, immediately." Hale was the first to obey, taking 2 quick backward steps while keeping his gaze fixed forward. Omandi followed. Ven hesitated, torn between terror and the scientist's fatal hunger to see what happened next. Chen began to step back. Sarek did not. He stood with his head tilted slightly, as if listening to a lecture given at the edge of hearing. "Doctor," Voss snapped. "Move." "It is not threatening us," Sarek said. "That is not the current standard." The black planes continued rising in sequence, each crowned by that central glow. Dust fell away from them in glittering curtains. The corridor extended farther inland, arrow straight, impossibly deliberate. Whatever system had built it had done so not in response to erosion, tectonics, or chance, but in response to an event: human arrival. Chen's heartbeat felt too loud in her suit. "Ilian." At last, Sarek stepped backward once, though he did not take his eyes from the corridor. "Captain," he said, his voice calm in a way Chen found almost infuriating, "I believe we are being directed." "By what?" "I don't know." "That is the right answer," Voss said. "Retreat." The team withdrew in controlled disorder, every instinct pulling their attention forward while discipline demanded movement the other way. The tone in the ground followed them, neither increasing nor diminishing. The corridor remained open. The ember lights did not brighten. Nothing pursued them. That made it worse. Because pursuit was simple. Predation belonged to life as humans knew it. But invitation implied expectation. It implied model, memory, purpose. Somewhere inside the architecture of Aurelion, something had registered their presence, compared it against criteria established before humanity had learned metallurgy, and decided on a response. By the time they reached the lander ramp, Chen's suit had logged 7 electromagnetic spikes, 3 unexplained mass fluctuations beneath the local crust, and 1 brief anomaly in the suit clock she chose not to report immediately because she did not yet trust herself to say it aloud. 42 seconds were missing, not from memory. from the synchronized internal chronometer. She checked it twice more and got the same result. "Inside," Hale said. One by one they boarded, the hatch sealed, pressures normalized, helmet locks cracked open with the sweetest mechanical sound Chen had ever heard. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Ven laughed once, harsh and joyless. "Well," he said, "at least the planet has manners." No one answered him. On the external monitors, the corridor of black plains still stood in the glittering basin, leading toward the interior. Beyond it, the auric sea shone under the great impossible sky. The spires burned softly from within. The nearby galaxies and planets looked down like witnesses to something long delayed finally beginning. Captain Voss appeared on the cabin display from orbit, his face drawn tighter than before. "Status report," he said. Chen opened her mouth, then closed it again. There were too many statuses: mission status, team status, planetary status, ontological status. Sarek spared her the burden. "It invited us," he said. Voss stared at him. "That is not a report." "No," Sarek said. His eyes remained on the image of the corridor outside. "It is the problem." Outside, beyond the lander hull, the glowing line into the heart of Aurelion waited in perfect silence. And though every protocol aboard the Khepri now argued for withdrawal to orbit, every mind in that cabin understood the same thing at once. They were going to follow it. They did not follow the corridor immediately. That was the first act of wisdom after the first act of surrender. For 9 hours, the Khepri remained in high orbit, while every surviving instrument aboard ship and lander was bent toward the black plains that had risen from the basin shelf. The corridor remained open. It did not advance. It did not close. The ember lights at the center of each upright slab held steady, radiating in wavelengths that shifted subtly through the infrared and into bands no human eye could have perceived unaided. The low harmonic beneath the crust continued without pause, but its structure changed once, then changed back again, like a machine repeating a phrase to see if it had been heard. Captain Aurelion Voss called the meeting in command briefing, and this time he dispensed with the professional fictions. "We are past first contact doctrine," he said. "The problem is only whether we admit it." No one contradicted him. The main display showed the basin shelf from 3 orbital angles, the lander crouched on black mineral ground, and beyond it the corridor running inland toward the spires. Between frames, the ship AI inserted telemetry overlays, gravity fluctuations, electromagnetic interference, thermal maps, chronometer drift. The data only deepened the same conclusion. The structure was not random. The response was not automatic in any simple sense. And whatever Aurelion had done, it had done specifically after humans arrived on its surface. Dr. Ilyan Sarek stood with both hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed not on the corridor but on the broader world map rotating to one side. "We are assuming the invitation leads inward," he said. "That may be our first error." Arthur Venn frowned. "The corridor points inland." "It points somewhere," Sarek said. "Direction is interpretation. We are still using human architectural instincts to decode something that may predate our species by geological epochs." Talia Omandi crossed her arms. "And yet it built a corridor, a fairly recognizable one. Or arranged a sequence of affordances that our minds classify as corridor." Jonas Hale leaned back in his chair. "That is a very elegant way of saying road." A few tired smiles flickered and disappeared. Mara Chen did not smile. She was watching the timing discrepancies. The missing 42 seconds from her suit clock had not remained an isolated anomaly. When they compared internal chronometers across the ground team, each suit showed a gap. But not the same gap. 42 seconds for Chen, 38 for Hale, 49 for Omandi. Sarek's showed no missing time at all, but his biosensor feed contained a burst of neural activity that did not correspond to any remembered event. They had all been present in the same moment, and time had treated them individually. She pushed the data to the room display. "This is why I think Sarek is partly right," she said. "The system isn't just reacting to position, it's interacting with observers, or with instruments at observer scale. Something about proximity to the corridor altered local temporal consistency." Voss looked up sharply. "Altered or corrupted?" "I don't know yet. The clocks didn't fail in a conventional sense. They remained internally coherent. They just didn't agree on elapsed duration." "So the planet may have introduced timing distortion around the team," Hale said, "and that's something we're considering walking back into." "That," said Chen, "is the concise version." Voss nodded once. "Then here are the new mission conditions. We go only if we can leave anchored references behind us. Tethered signal repeaters. Entangled timing pairs. Passive drones overhead and behind. No one goes anywhere without external baselines." "And if baselines fail?" Omandi asked. Voss met her eyes. "Then we leave ignorance where it is and go home." Sarek looked at him for a long second. "You don't believe that?" Voss's expression did not change. Belief is not a command decision. But he did believe something, Chen thought. Perhaps that they had already crossed the true threshold when they chose to land. Exploration was often imagined as a line drawn on a map, but the real threshold was moral. The moment a question became large enough that returning unanswered began to feel like a kind of defeat civilization would remember for centuries. The meeting ended with authorization. One more descent. One more traverse. One contact. If the corridor remained, it remained. The second landing took place beneath a darker sky. High cloud bands had drifted over the basin, muting the blaze of direct light into a luminous bronze haze. The auric sea no longer shone like a mirror of fire. Now it looked heavier, deeper, almost black beneath the gold. A fluid reservoir of concealed mass rather than spectacle. The black planes still stood where they had risen, their central circles glowing steadily, each one dusted along its edges by fresh metallic deposition, as if the planet had begun reclaiming even its own gesture. The ground team changed slightly. Solano remained with the lander. Ven stayed in orbit, furious at being ordered off the list, and even more furious when Voss reminded him that geology could be done by remote, and survival could not. In his place went Voss himself. "I'm not sending 5 people into an active alien system while I watch from a chair," he said when Chen objected. "Not this time." So they walked as 5, Voss, Chen, Sarek, Omandi, and Hale. Each carried timing beacons on their backs and additional anchor stakes clipped to their harnesses. Every 20 meters, Hale planted one into the mineral ground with compact mechanical blows that rang too sharply in the thick air. Behind them, repeaters stitched a chain of measurements back to the lander. Signal latency, gravity gradients, magnetic phase drift, chronometric variance. A thread of human certainty, thin as wire. Ahead, the corridor waited. Close up, the black planes were not metal in any ordinary sense. Their surfaces swallowed visible light without losing reflectivity altogether. Shapes moved across them only when viewed from the edge of perception. Under suit illumination, They revealed fine structures like nested filaments, frozen within polished stone. The glowing circles at their centers were not lamps, not lenses, but cavities of controlled depth, each containing a light source that seemed farther away than the slab's thickness allowed. "Every material property contradicts another one," Chen said quietly, mostly to her recorder. "That may be the defining aesthetic principle of this place," said Sarek. The harmonic under the ground intensified as they entered between the first two planes. At once, Chen felt the same subtle pressure she had felt on first footfall, but now magnified. Not merely dense air against the suit, but a resistance in perception itself, as if the world were asking her to pay closer attention than the human brain was designed to sustain. The corridor floor, if floor was the word, was a strip of dark ground smoother than the terrain outside it, bordered by faint lines of ember light beneath translucent mineral crust. The distant spires ahead no longer seemed random. They resolved into a pattern of heights and intervals clustered around a central rise where the harmonic source pulsed strongest. "No temporal drift yet," Hale said. Voss glanced at his display. "Keep the markers coming." They walked. At 100 meters the sky changed, not in weather, in geometry. The near planet that had loomed above the western horizon seemed to shift position by a fraction too large for orbital mechanics and too small for certainty. Chen stopped, looked twice, and saw it settle back. Omandi, a few steps ahead, turned at the same instant. "You saw that, too?" "Yes." "Report only confirmed observations," Voss said. Chen almost answered. That was confirmed. Twice. But she knew what he meant. A place that interfered with time and instrument continuity could also interfere with the oldest instrument of all. The corridor led them toward the interior spire field, then descended. At first the slope was slight, then undeniable. The black basin shelf folded inward between cliffs of reflective stone, revealing a broad depression beyond. At its center, where orbital scans had blurred into anomaly, stood the thing that none of the probe images had shown clearly enough. A settlement. For 3 full seconds, no one spoke, because the human mind had to traverse too much distance too fast, from primordial alien megastructure to something unmistakably built at human scale. Domes rose from the edge of a narrow inlet of the Auric Sea, their surfaces bright gold under the dim sky. Not metallic fluid, but plated or coated structures, geodesic and smooth, linked by low corridors and raised walkways. Slender towers stood behind them, bristling with antennae, radiator fins, and orbital relay vanes. Small landing pads marked the shore. Modular cylinders, habitat cans, storage units, utility pods, lined one terrace in a pattern any frontier engineer would recognize within a second. And above the inlet, suspended by pale trusses over the reflective water, hung a ring of emitters that hummed with the same frequency as the buried world below. Jonas Hale was the first to say it. "That," he whispered, "is ours." No one argued because at first glance it was. Human architecture had signatures as specific as DNA, standard fabrication ratios, modular spacing based on human reach and maintenance practice, repeated geometry derived from shipping constraints, pressure door spacing intended for bodies of known size. The outpost below them carried all of that. It looked like a remote survey colony, a small one, functional, exposed to risk. The kind of place built fast because something important had been found. But the Khepri had brought the first humans here. That was known. That was mission history. That was the entire premise of their presence. Chen heard her own breathing become loud in her helmet. "Captain." "I know," Voss said. His voice had gone thin. Omandi zoomed her visor optics. No visible personnel, no movement, "Wait," said Sarek. At the far end of the largest dome near the shore, a figure stood, suit-clad, human in silhouette, motionless. Then another emerged from the shadow of a smaller dome. Then a third, walking slowly along the elevated causeway above the water. Voss spoke to the ship at once. "Khepri, full-spectrum scan of the depression below our coordinates. Confirm structures. Confirm power signatures. Confirm life signs, if any." Static crackled. The orbital link wavered, then returned. Chen listened to the reply and felt cold, despite the suit regulation. The ship saw no domes, no towers, no causeways, no settlement at all. Only the depression, the inlet, the spire field. Nothing else. Hale muttered something unprintable. The figures below began moving toward the shore in unhurried coordination, not running, not hiding, simply converging, as if answering a schedule. Sarek took one step forward. "Don't," Voss said. "I think the system is presenting interface." "I do not care what you think it is. We do not move until we know whether we are seeing reality or being shown one." Sarek stopped, but only barely. Chen forced herself to analyze. The structures cast reflections in the auric inlet. Fine. Hallucinations could do that if the visual field was fully manipulated. The suit lidars, however, were returning ambiguous surfaces at the same coordinates. Not clean solids, not empty terrain. Something in between, as if the system could not decide whether to reveal matter or simulate it. Then her suit pinged. A local handshake request. Not from the Khepri, not from the lander, not from any human hardware signature she recognized. Her display filled with an unfamiliar symbol set, concentric arcs, branching intervals, rotating geometries that matched nothing in mission software and yet carried an undeniable machine logic. Before she could block it, the pattern rearranged itself. Into numerals. Not Federation standard, not any human script, but mathematical, prime numbers stepping upward in luminous sequence. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. The same appeared across every suit visor. Omandi made a strangled sound that might have been laughter or fear. "It's talking." "No," Sarek said, eyes fixed ahead. "It is establishing common ground." The sequence changed. Constants now, ratios, hydrogen line references, pulsar periods. The language of civilizations too careful to begin with nouns. Chen felt something then that she would later be ashamed to call relief, because relief implied safety, and this was not safe. But it was a grammar, a beginning, a sign that the abyss, however deep, might at least possess structure. Voss's voice sharpened into command. "All systems record. No outbound transmission except mirrored math. Chen, give it the least committal answer possible." She almost laughed. "In mathematics?" "The least committal mathematics you know." She sent a return set, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Mirror acknowledgement. Nothing more. The visor symbols paused, then changed again. A model unfolded in light before her eyes, not projected by the suit, imposed within its visual field. A star, orbital shells, trajectories, then a planet with a crust rendered in transparent layers. Beneath the crust, lines, chambers, nodal wells. Beneath the auric seas, the structure, vast beyond any human excavation, interlocking beneath much of the world like a second planet made of intention. The model zoomed. Time accelerated. She saw Aurelion in earlier ages, or what the system claimed were earlier ages. The sky held different stars. The neighboring giants lay on slightly altered paths. Enormous arrays orbited above the planet and descended into it in controlled streams. Matter flowed. Heat moved. The metallic seas formed not as accidents, but as engineered reservoirs, thermal and conductive, feeding a lattice below the crust. Spires rose, harmonic networks activated. The entire world became a machine, not for war, not for habitation, but for endurance. A vault, or an archive, or both. The image shifted again. A small group of figures appeared on a shore near structures very much like the ones below in the depression. The figures were not human, though upright and tool-bearing. Their proportions were wrong. Their heads were encased or naturally elongated. Their motions were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. One by one they entered a chamber beneath the largest dome while the planet's network brightened around them. The final figure turned, toward the viewer, toward Chen, toward any intelligence receiving the message, and raised a hand or limb in a gesture that might have meant farewell. Then the chamber sealed. The world went dark except for its deepest systems, and time passed. A very great deal of time. The display vanished. Chen staggered half a step and caught herself. "Captain," she said, and heard how small her own voice sounded. "I think this isn't a city." "What is it?" "A reception." Sarek nodded once, as if something had finally clicked into place inside him. "Yes," he said. "Not a colony. A mnemonic architecture, a shape chosen because we would understand arrival better than abstraction." Below them the domes glowed more warmly. The figures at the shore waited. "Mnemonic or not, it is still manipulating perception," Hale said. "That means risk." "Everything means risk," Sarek answered. "That is not an argument." "No," Voss said. "But it is true." He looked down into the depression for a long time, long enough that Chen knew he was not deciding whether to be brave. He was deciding what kind of history he was willing to permit. Turn back now, and humanity would leave with evidence of contact but no understanding. Proceed, and they might step into a mechanism that had mistaken them for heirs, intruders, or replacements. At last, he said, "We go to the shore, no farther. We maintain tether and line of retreat. If anything changes beyond defined tolerances, we leave." Hale began to protest, then didn't. Because everyone already knew that the decision had been made the instant the prime numbers appeared. They descended. Up close, the settlement was less convincing and more moving. The domes retained human-like proportions, but details slipped under scrutiny. Door seams were fractionally too broad. Railings rose at angles adjusted to no ergonomic standard Chen knew. Transparent panels showed interiors that made intuitive sense at a glance. Work tables, consoles, sleeping alcoves, yet dissolved into non-human arrangements if she stared too long. It was like walking through a translation that understood purpose better than form. The figures waited at the water's edge, 3 of them. Their suits, or bodies, were silver gray and smooth, reflective enough to erase detail. Faces remained hidden behind dark visors or featureless masks. Height nearly human, build nearly human. Not disguise, Chen realized, but approximation. The system using their own template to reduce cognitive violence. The harmonic beneath the ground softened as the team approached the inlet. Then one of the figures raised its hand. Chen's visor filled with one final sequence. Not numbers this time. A branching diagram of stars. One branch dark, one active. Then a new point igniting far away. Message by implication, we are gone. The system remains. You are early. You are not the intended return, but you are here. Omandi let out a breath. It was waiting for them. And got us, Hale said. Sarek stepped to the edge of the auric inlet. The metallic fluid lay still as polished thought. In its reflection, the domes behind them appeared not golden but black, and the figures by the shore were tall and strange and unmistakably alien. That, Chen thought, was the truth breaking through the courtesy layer. Voss spoke carefully as though precision itself were an offering. If this is an archive, he said, not knowing whether speech mattered, we acknowledge receipt. The nearest figure lowered its hand. The entire depression answered. Lights came on beneath the domes, first one, then dozens, then hundreds. Along the spire field, ember veins brightened from within black stone. Across the basin shelf behind them, the corridor slabs glowed at their centers in perfect sequence all the way back toward the sea. Farther still, over the auric waters, concentric rings spread from invisible nodes, intersecting in grids of reflected gold. Above, the cloud deck parted. A shaft of hard starlight fell through the opening and struck the largest dome. Its surface dissolved. Not exploded. Dissolved into motes of light and descending symbols, revealing a circular chamber below the shore. In its center stood a column of crystal or frozen field, within which shapes moved slowly like memories, learning how to occupy present time. The Khepri called down from orbit, Voss's comm filling with overlapping voices. Massive power increases planet-wide. Orbital systems waking. Energy transmission up through the crust and into near space. The world machine was emerging from standby. Captain, Chen said, we may have activated the whole network. Voss did not look away from the chamber, or completed a handshake it has been trying to perform for an age. Difference? Scale. The figures at the shore began to fade, their approximation no longer needed. For an instant, Chen saw what remained beneath the translation. Tall entities with branching limbs, faceted cranial structures, and surfaces that seemed woven from metal and mineral both. Then they too became light. Not dead, not alive. Stored. Stored until witness arrived. The crystal column brightened. Information began to stream, not in words not yet, but in compressed structures hammering at the edge of interpretation. Astronomical maps, material sciences, stellar engineering schemes, biological lattices, histories, warnings. So much of it that Chen's suit buffers screamed overload within seconds. This is too much, Omandi gasped. No one can receive this directly. Then it was never meant for individuals, Sarek said. His face, seen through the helmet glass, held something close to grief. It was meant for civilizations. Voss made the decision then, the one history would later reduce to a sentence and argue about for centuries. Record everything. But we do not stay for full transfer. We take acknowledgement, proof, and withdrawal. Humanity can come back prepared. Sarek turned to him sharply. We may never get the same access again. Then we don't squander the first by dying in it. For a moment, Chen thought Sarek would refuse. Instead, he nodded once, with visible effort, like a man agreeing to leave a library while it was still burning its lamps for him. They backed away from the chamber. As they withdrew, the light stabilized rather than dimmed. Aurelion was not shutting down. It was remaining awake. The corridor behind them shone like a line written across the world. High above, inactive orbital objects, satellites, stations, fragments of a system long presumed dead, began to reveal themselves one by one against the stars as old transponders answered the planetary network. A civilization's skeleton was climbing back into signal. By the time the team reached the lander, the depression below had become a continent of lit geometry. The false human domes were gone. In their place stood elegant non-human forms that no longer bothered to translate themselves. Towers grew out of the shore like latticed bone. Bridges arced over the metallic inlet in impossible catenaries. Beneath the surface of the auric sea, dark shapes shifted in enormous coordinated motion. The welcome had ended. The reality had begun. They lifted off under protest from every instrument aboard. The peregrine rose through heavy atmosphere while Aurelion opened below. Across the hemisphere, lines of light traveled under the crust, connecting spire fields, basin reservoirs, and buried nodal chambers. Orbital scans now resolved thousands of structures where before there had seemed only geology. What had slept as landscape had awakened as infrastructure. On the flight deck, Solano stared at the feeds and said, with admirable restraint, "I'm going to need a longer report than interesting rocks." No one laughed. They docked with the Khepri 6 minutes later. Debrief began immediately and failed immediately because language lagged too far behind event. Chen submitted raw datasets instead of conclusions. Omandi locked herself in Biolab and began trying to define whether a non-biological archive designed for eventual cultural succession counted as alive. Hale requested, and was denied, 12 uninterrupted hours of silence. Voss filed priority codes all the way back to Home Command, and then personally reviewed every outgoing packet 3 times before transmitting. Only Sarek did not go to his quarters. Chen found him in Observation Ring 2, where Aurelion turned beneath the glass. The planet no longer looked empty. Points of light moved in orbit now, old machines relighting. Thin, luminous lines traced paths over the night side. In one basin, near where they had landed, something enormous was rising through the metallic sea with stately, impossible slowness. "You were right," Chen said. Sarek shook his head. "No, I was merely less wrong a little earlier." She stood beside him. For a while they watched in silence. Then she said, "Do you think they're dead?" He considered the planet below before answering. "I think they solved death in a way that makes the word less useful," he said. "They built a world to remember them until someone capable of receiving memory arrived, whether they expected descendants, rivals, students, or strangers." He gave the slightest shrug. "That remains unanswered." "And now?" "Now we return with proof that humanity is not the first intelligence to build beyond survival." His eyes remained on the waking world. "And proof that the universe sometimes leaves inheritance unattended." Chen thought of the chamber, the flooding data, the translated domes, the alien figures rendered just human enough to soothe the first shock. Courtesy built into machinery millions of years old. A hand extended across extinction and time. "What do you think wakes next?" she asked. Sarek looked toward the far limb of the planet, where one dark orbital object had just emitted a flare bright enough to cast a silver line across the glass. "I suspect," he said, "that Aurelion was not a solitary project." That settled between them. Not as fear, not quite, as scale. Below, the golden seas burned softly in the starshine. The reawakened network spread light through the crust like thought returning to a vast and ancient mind. In orbit, dead stations turned their faces toward the sun. Beyond them, the neighboring planets moved along paths laid down before humanity had possessed language for the atom, and farther still, the galaxy opened its spiral arms in indifferent grandeur. Captain Voss's priority transmission left the Khepri at 0214 shipboard time. Its first line was simple enough for any civilization to understand. We found a world that was waiting. Its second line was more difficult. It may not have been waiting only for us. And on Aurelion, in a chamber beneath the shore of a metallic sea, a signal older than the human species completed its planetary handshake, turned outward at last, and began searching the dark.